Okay, so in this chapter of the course, we're going to start working with the document object model, also referred to as the DOM. So if you go to MDM, developer.mozilla.org, you can get more information about the document object model, how it interacts with JavaScript, how you can access it, interfaces, examples, etc. But for this tutorial, I just want to very briefly explain it in my own words. So what is the document object model? And that is the whole point of this chapter of the course. Well, firstly, I want to introduce it as the DOM. So the DOM, when we say DOM, D-O-M, we are referring to the document object model. What it is the idea that every web page is almost like a tree-like structure, whereby you have the document, inside of it you'll have the head and the body, inside of that you'll have different elements. And what you can do is you can use the document object model to traverse this tree-like structure and essentially change content on a web page. So the whole point of the document object model is that you can manipulate the structure of a web page, style, and contents. Obviously, when you know basic HTML and CSS, you can make content static on a page. But once you understand the document object model, you can respond to user events, a user clicking on a button to create content, delete content, change style, colors, etc. So we're going to be working with the document object model over the next few tutorials to create elements, remove elements, change text, styling, etc. So we have all that to look forward to in this chapter of the course. Okay, so in this tutorial what we're going to do is we're going to use the document object model to actually change content on our HTML page. So we haven't seen the index.html file in quite some time, but this is what it is. We have our document with our opening HTML tag and our closing HTML tag. We have the head and we have the body. Okay, so this is our index.html file. What I want to do is I'm going to create a h2 here in the HTML page, and we're just going to say Paris. And what I want to do in this tutorial is I want to write JavaScript that changes the text Paris to be Madrid. So that's what we're going to do in this tutorial. So if I open Google Chrome and refresh, we have now added our h2 there to the web page. Okay, awesome. So when you are working with the document object model, you have to ask yourself what it is you're trying to do. What we're trying to do is grab this element, Paris, and change its content. So what we're going to do is we're going to give this h2 an ID, and that ID is going to be city. So the document object model allows us to actually get reference to elements in a HTML page by their ID. So remember, it's document object model. So if I type out document, and document is the document, it's the HTML page essentially. If I say dot get element by ID, so we see here, because we know document and it is the document object model, document is basically an object, there's all these inbuilt methods. So we can say get element by ID, and this h2 has an ID of city, so we can get a reference to that. So we have our parentheses because it is a method, and inside of quotes I'm just going to say city. And what we can do is, if you want to, you can actually store all of that inside of a variable. So if I say let city be equal to document.getElement by ID, and I pass in city, so the ID of this h2 element, what it can do is just console.log out city to the console. So what I've done is I've used the document object model to grab this h2 here with the ID of city and the content of Paris. I've stored it in the variable called city, and I'm just logging that out to the console. So if I save and refresh, what we see is we actually get the h2 here inside of the console. But rather than just logging out city to the console, what I want to do is I want to say city dot and change the inner HTML. You can also do inner text, and I want to assign that the value now of Madrid. So what's happening is when our HTML page loads, we have JavaScript is awesome, then we have this H2, but then the script file runs, and what we've done is we've basically said document.getElementById, the ID of city, which is this H2 here. And all I just did was I stored it in the variable city, and then I said city.innerHTML. I was able to access the inner HTML and change that to be Madrid. And if I save and refresh, we've now changed Paris to be Madrid. So that's awesome. We've actually used JavaScript to change the content on a HTML page. So we're going to be working with the document object model over the next few tutorials to add content, delete content, create content, change styling, etc. So we've all of that to look forward to in this part of the course. Hello everyone and welcome back. Okay, in this tutorial what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how you can change text content using the document object model. However, I want to do it in, I don't want to say a better way than the last tutorial, but I want to show you a better way, okay? And I'll explain why. So what I want to do is I want to delete all of this that we did in the last tutorial, and I actually want to change this H2 to be a paragraph. So we'll just change that to be an opening p tag and a closing p tag. And what we'll do is once again we'll change this city from Paris to be Madrid. So we have our opening and closing p tag. If I go down to Google Chrome and just refresh, we see here we have Paris the text. So in the last tutorial what we did was we were able to grab this piece of content, i.e. Paris, using the document object model. And what we did was we changed the text content using inner HTML, okay? But what I want to do is I want to actually show you that we can use a different way, and that is by changing the inner text. So initially they look like they do the same thing, but they actually don't, and that's what I'm going to show you now in this tutorial. So what I want to do is I once again want to get a reference to Paris here using document.getElementById, and we're just going to change the inner HTML. So what we want to do is we want to say let city. We want to store all of this inside of a city variable. So first we need to get a reference to it. So we can say document.getElementById. We have our parentheses, and we need to pass in the ID. And what is the ID? Well, we give it a name of city, right? So it's city there. So let me just Control C and Control V. Awesome. Okay, now what I want to do is I want to get a reference to city. So I want to say we have grabbed it. So I just want to say city dot inner HTML, and I want to change that to be Madrid. Semicolon to save. So hopefully this is starting to look a bit more familiar now. We're saying to the document object model, we're saying document dot get element by ID, and we're passing in the city ID. So that is a reference to all of this here. We saw that logged out in the console in the last tutorial, and we're storing it in the city variable. So city is now essentially all of this, and then I'm just changing the inner HTML to be Madrid. So if I save and refresh, we get Madrid, and that's awesome. But there's a different way to do it, and the reason is as follows. When you change the inner HTML, you're also able to manipulate the content itself, where with inner text, you can only change the text. So for example, what I can do, so if I just show you the browser again, we have Madrid here as a paragraph. I can actually change more than just the text because we've used inner HTML. So for example, if I was to wrap our text inside of an opening strong tag and a closing strong tag, what you'll find is the inner HTML is going to change, and it's now going to be bolded. So if I just save and refresh, we see Madrid has now been bolded, okay? So why is that a problem? Well, the problem is if you're going to change text content, you don't want to give anyone the ability to potentially, maliciously change the content. So here, for example, we were able to manipulate not only the text, i.e. from Paris to Madrid, but we were also able to change the styling there. So one way to make sure users can never manipulate more than they're supposed to is you could, for example, just use the inner text. So another way of changing the text, but without using .inner HTML, is we can actually just use inner text. So all you need to do is instead of saying city.inner HTML is equal to Madrid, we can say city.inner text. And all we need to do then is just assign that our new value, and this is going to be Madrid. Okay, so that's one key difference between the inner HTML and the inner text. With the inner text, we're really only changing the text content. And to prove that to you, if I was to attempt to do what I did above here, wrap Madrid inside of an opening and closing strong tag, look what happens when I do it using the inner text. What you'll find is inner text takes what we put in quite literally. So rather than bolding Madrid, it's actually going to say strong Madrid strong. Okay? So guys, that is how we can change text content another way using the document object model. Probably better to use the inner text because that way there's no ability for the user to manipulate the actual styling of the text content. Okay, awesome. And there's nothing wrong with using the document object model to change styling, by the way. You just want to make sure it's done in a controlled way that it only happens if you want it to happen as the person potentially building a website. It's the same way that a lot of web applications want to protect themselves from SQL injection attacks, where there might be certain characters you're not allowed to use, in case you're trying to access a website's database, or they'll limit characters, etc. It's just another way to protect yourselves because there are some bad actors out there, unfortunately. Okay, awesome. So enough negativity on my part. That was an awesome tutorial. We saw a different way how we were able to change content using inner text. So I hope you enjoyed that tutorial, and I'll see you in the next one where we will continue working with the document object model. So key takeaway so far is that you can use the document object model to change text content. We saw how we can use inner HTML, and we can now use inner text. But there's a lot more cool stuff we can do using the document object model. So I will see you in the next tutorial. Hi friends, and welcome back. Okay, in this tutorial, what I would like to do is I want us to change Paris. I want to change its color. So if I just save and refresh, we have Paris here. Paris is a paragraph. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to change the color of that to be, let's say, green. Okay, how do we do that? Well, once again, we know that if you're looking to change something, a text to color, whatever the case may be, you first need to get a reference to it. And we saw we can do that using the document object model. So we can say document dot get element by ID. So this is an inbuilt method in JavaScript. We have our parentheses and we need to pass in the ID, and we have given Paris an ID of city, so we can just say city. And what I want to do is I want to store all of this into a variable. So just say let city be equal to, and then if I just log out the city, if I say console.log city, what we should see is we're actually getting a reference to Paris. So for example, we see here we have the opening and closing p tags, the ID is city, and Paris is the text content. So how would we change the color? Well, all you would have to do is say city dot and access the style property inside of CSS, and then with style, if you do the dot again, you're able to essentially access all of these different properties. So for example, eventually you'll see line height, etc., but we should also see that there is color. So city.style.color, And what I can do is assign that the value of green and semicolon to end our statement here. So if I save and refresh, we see Paris now green. It's a little bit difficult to see, so we can change that to be blue. And we see Paris is now blue. Okay, awesome. Another thing you could do as well is you don't have to change just the text content or the color. You could actually do both. So one thing we could do is do what we did in the last tutorial. We could say city dot inner text and change that to be Madrid. So what will happen now is when I save and refresh, initially the page will load and we will have a paragraph with the value of Paris or the inner text. And then when our script file loads, our JavaScript file, because remember we have our script tags here at the end, once the HTML page loads, we then enter the script file. What we do is we get a reference to that Paris paragraph, we store it inside of city, we change the inner text of city to be Madrid, and we change the style and the color, so city.style.color to be blue. So now if I save and refresh, we get Madrid. Okay, awesome. And the reason, remember, that's Madrid while we have Paris here. So the page will initially load with a paragraph of Paris, but once the script file loads, we're basically just very quickly changing the inner text to be Madrid and the style to be blue. Yeah, so you see that? It looks like it was initially Paris, but you see that JavaScript is actually overriding the value of the inner text there to be Madrid and changing the color. Okay, awesome. So that's how you can change the color of text using the document object model. You can access the style and then access any property you want inside of style. So you could, for example, change the line height as well. So I'll let you play around with that, but we're going to be working with more document object model features and cool stuff to learn over the next few tutorials. So hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Hello everyone and welcome back. Okay, in this tutorial what I want to do is I want to essentially change the color of Paris, we'll say just the color, when a user clicks on a button. Okay, so if you want to try and code that ahead of time, please do. So what you'll need to do is you'll need to create a button in the HTML file, and then using document.getElementById, you can store that into a variable called button. And what this tutorial is going to be about is I'm going to teach you about onClick, an inbuilt method in JavaScript that is essentially an event listener. So what we're going to be doing in this tutorial is listening out for an event. So instead of just the HTML page loading and the JavaScript file loading and automatically it changes the color of Paris, we only want to do that when a user clicks on a button. So that's what this tutorial is going to be about. So the first thing we need to do, first of all, is we actually need to create a button. So let's do that. So we will have an opening button tag and a closing button tag, and we will just say click me to the user. So if I just save and refresh, we now have a button there that says click me. And the only way so far in this course we know how to query HTML elements from the DOM or using a document object model is with ID. So we need to give this button an ID. So we will say ID is equal to button and press Ctrl S to save. And now our button has an ID. And that's awesome. Okay, great. Now what I want to do is I want to create a variable called button, and we'll say document.getElementById. We'll pass in the ID of button and we'll store it in a variable button. So what we'll do is we'll say let button be equal to document.getElementById. We have our parentheses, and what we need to do is we need to just pass in the ID of the button. So we've given this button an ID of button, okay? Button is the only element on this HTML page that has an ID of button. And then what we can do is if I just say console.log button, and remember button is a variable, so when I log out to the console button button is a variable here, and it has been assigned the value of document.getElementById. So using that method getElementById, we're basically grabbing this element from the document object model. So if I just open up my console, and if I refresh, we see here we get the button. Okay, that's awesome. So now we've got the button. Let's just add an event listener to it. So what I'll do is I'm going to show you now about the on-click event listener. How this works is you take the element, in this case the button. Using dot notation, we've access to on-click, this inbuilt event handler or property inside of JavaScript. And then what we can do is when the user clicks on the button, we're going to run a function. So we're just going to say button.onClick and assign it the value of function. It'll be a function that isn't expecting, any arguments passed in. And because it's our first time working with event listener, let's just say you clicked me. We're just going to log that out to the console, okay? So now what I've done is firstly, I've created a button in JavaScript, opening button tag, closing button tag. We have the click me text there. So that's what the user sees, okay? We give the button an ID of button. Then in our JavaScript file, we basically took that button that we saw because we said document.getElementById and we passed in the button ID. We stored it in this variable button. So button here is just a reference to the button we saw on the page. And when the user clicks on the button, because we use onClick, we run a function and the function just logs out you clicked me. So that function will only run when I click on the button. If I refresh the page, nothing happens. But if I click on the button, we log out, you clicked me. Awesome. So we've just listened out for an event happening in this course for the first time. So that's pretty cool. But instead of logging out, you clicked me, what I actually want to do is I want to change the color of this paragraph here with the ID of city. So we know how to do that. So all we need to do is instead of just logging something out to the console, let's say document.getElementById. We want to pass in the ID of city because that is the ID for this paragraph with the value of Paris. And what we want to do is we want to essentially change its style, specifically the color. So using dot notation, we can access style and then dot notation again, color. And we've seen this notation before with objects. And all we need to do is just pass in the value that we want. And I'm going to change the color to blue. So now when the user clicks on the button, we've an event listener here. Please note the lowercase c. And we've assigned that the value of a function with no name. And when the user clicks on the button, we're going to say document.getElementById, the city. We're getting a reference to the paragraph here with the ID of city. And we're changing the color to be blue. So if I save and refresh, Paris is now blue. If you wanted, you could also change it to be red, because that is also another color on the French flag. So if I save and refresh and click again, Paris is now red. Okay, awesome. So guys, that is the on-click inbuilt property in JavaScript. It is very powerful as we can use it to listen out for a user event, i.e. do some code, but only when the user clicks on a button. So we're starting to understand now the power of the document object model, where instead of just adding an element to a page and then just changing it for no reason, the way we did the last few tutorials, you can now change content based on a user click. So that's awesome, and I'll see you in the next tutorial. Okay, so in this tutorial what we're going to do is we're going to learn about another method, pardon the pun, in which you can query the document object model for elements. So what I've done is I've created 3 paragraphs here, but you'll notice there's no ID. There's no ID on the paragraphs, and I've removed the ID from the button. So based on what we know so far, document.getElementById, we have no way to query the elements and listen out for a user click or change the color or the font size of an element. Well, that is where we get to the next part of this course where I teach you about the query selector. So what we can do is we can use query selector, and this will return the first element that matches that selector. So for example, if I was to do query selector and pass in P for paragraph, we're going to grab that paragraph there. But if I do it for a button, as there's only one button, we're going to grab that button. So let's just write up the code. So I'm going to create a variable. We'll say let button be equal to, we'll say document.query selector, and how this works is you pass in the type you're looking for. So I'm looking for any element that is a button. And now if I just log out to the console, console.log button, what do we get? Well, let's have a look. And we get button. Okay, awesome. Now what we can do is we can also create a variable for the first paragraph we get. So we can say let paragraph be equal to document.query selector parentheses, and we're going to pass in P here. So we're basically asking this inbuilt method to query the document object model for the first paragraph it finds. Okay, and the first paragraph on the page will be this one here. And now what I want to do is I just want to add an event listener to this variable that we've called button. So we can just say button dot on click. When the user clicks it, we're going to assign it the value of a function. So you have a function here with parentheses, we have our curly braces, and then we write our code inside of our code block. And what we can do is we can just get paragraph using dot notation access the style, then using dot notation access the color, and we will assign that a value of blue, semicolon to end the statement. And now if we save and refresh, if I click on the button, the first paragraph goes blue. You'll also know that you can change more than one style property. So you could, for example, also say paragraph.style.font size. Font size, oops, apologies, I'm trying to select it. So font size, note the uppercase S, and assign that a value of 50px, semicolon to end the statement. And now if I save and refresh, we've now changed both the color and the font size of an element on the page. And we've done that using the query selector for both the first button and the first paragraph. Okay, that's awesome. Another very quick thing to note is you don't have to use the function keyword. You can turn that to an arrow function as well if you wanted, and that will still work. And just to prove it, if I save and refresh and then click, our code still works. So this is really cool now, because what we're learning is that we can use the document object model to essentially get for us elements from the page, and then based on a user event, a click, a hover, we can actually run some code, i.e. change the inner text of an element, we can change the inner HTML, we can even change the styling properties, color, font size, etc. So the key takeaway from this tutorial is we've learned another way to query the DOM, and that is using the query selector method. Note the use of the uppercase S, and what this method will do is will turn the first element that matches the selector, so the first element that we find. Okay, that's awesome. I'll see you in the next one. Hi friends, and welcome back. Okay, in this tutorial what I want to do is I want us to click this button and change the color of all of these Canadian cities and maybe make the font size a bit bigger. So how we're going to do that is I'm going to introduce you in this tutorial to query selector all. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to do what we've done previously. We'll use query selector to grab the button. When the user clicks on it, we'll log something out to the console. And then what I'll do is I'll show you how we can use query selector all. In fact, you know what? Let me just do query selector all first, and let me show you this. So I'm going to say let paragraphs be equal to, and I'm going to say document dot query selector all. Okay, query selector all is an inbuilt method in JavaScript, and I am going to pass in P for paragraphs. Then what I want to do is I want to just log out to the console, console.log paragraphs, and I want to show you what we get. So if I do this, we actually get this node list, okay? So a node list is a data type that we have not yet covered. It's beyond the scope, I would say, of beginner JavaScript, but don't worry. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how we can use for each to essentially iterate over each paragraph. But I want to only do that when the user clicks on the button. So we'll say let button be equal to document.query selector, and we'll just pass in button. So in our index.html file, we have one button here, okay? So what I'm going to do is on the button, I'm going to put the on click, if I can spell correctly, on click, okay? And we're going to assign that the value of an arrow function. So when the user clicks on the button, let's just log out button clicked. Just want to make sure that's all hooked up and working. So if I save and refresh, click on the button, we get button clicked. Okay, awesome. Now what I want to do is, instead of just logging out to the console that the button was clicked, I want to just show you what the paragraphs look like. So we need to use the for each to iterate over each paragraph. I don't want you to see just node list in the console. I want you to actually see what the paragraphs are. So how we can do that is as follows. We can say paragraphs dot for each, that inbuilt method in JavaScript. It is a method, so we have to have our parentheses, and this is expecting at least one argument passed in. So we're going to pass in a callback function that is going to fire for each paragraph in the node list, and each time the for each runs, we have to get a reference to what each paragraph is. So we need to come up with a placeholder name. I'm just going to call it paragraph with no apostrophe s. So note that paragraphs is a reference to all the paragraphs, and paragraph will be a reference to each paragraph we're iterating over. And now that we've done that, I can say console.log paragraph, okay? So paragraph is the paragraph that we're iterating over using the inbuilt for each method. So if I now save and refresh, now if I click on the button, we see here we get the paragraphs. Okay, awesome. But instead of just logging out the paragraph to the console, let's change the color. So we can say paragraph.style.color. Let's assign this the value of red because they are Canadian cities. And let's just make the font size a bit bigger. So we can say paragraph.style.font size. Font size is there. And let's just do maybe 35 pixels. Semicolon to end the statement. So now if I save and refresh, and if I click on the button, we get our Canadian cities. They're bigger and they're red. Okay, awesome. So how did we do that? Well, in this tutorial, we learned about the query selector all. So the very first thing we did was we actually got a reference to our button in our JavaScript file. We said let button, so button is just a variable, and we stored the value of document.querySelector button. So basically the button is stored in this button variable. Then we got the paragraphs, all of the cities, the Canadian cities paragraphs, by saying document. Remember, document is an object, and objects have properties and methods built onto them. So we said document.querySelector all. Note the capital S and the capital A, so our camel case there. And we put in a little p here. So this is going to get, querySelector all is going to get all of the paragraphs. And we stored it in a variable called paragraphs. Then what we did was we added an event listener onto our button. We're listening out for a user click. So button.onClick, when the button is clicked, we then fire this arrow function. So we've assigned button.onClick the value of this arrow function here. So we have our parentheses, our little equal sign chevron, our opening and closing curly brace. So all of this is code that's going to run when the user clicks on the button. An arrow function is going to fire. And what we did was, for the paragraphs, we called the for each method. So we just have to come up with a placeholder name here that gets reference to each paragraph when the callback function fires. So we call the paragraph, and therefore we can say paragraph.style.color, and we change that to red, and we said paragraph.style.font size is equal to 35. Okay, so that's awesome. And you see here that even though we're learning about the document object model, we're still using code we've seen previously. You know, we have dot notation to access various properties of an object. We have a for each. We have our little arrow function there. But the key takeaway from this tutorial is, in addition to get element by ID and query selector, we also have query selector all. Okay, I'll leave that tutorial there, and I hope to see you in the next one. Hello everyone, and welcome back. Okay, in this tutorial we're going to be learning about the inbuilt method get elements by class name. So we're going to learn how we can query elements from the document object model using this method get elements by class name. So what I've done is I've created a fictional scenario for us. We work for a North American airline. We fly to and from cities in Canada, the United States of America, and Mexico. But here's the problem. There is a massive snowstorm that hits all of Canada. It does not affect New York for some reason, even though that's very close to Toronto. And what happens is, our boss gets a phone call from the CEO. They want to make all of the Canadian cities the text color to be in red, and they want to make it bigger because we're basically working for this airline, and we're going to be like, you know, hey, look at our awesome deals and make the cities really big to make sure that people are spending money because the airline is losing money. No one wants to travel because of the storm. So what we're going to do is we're going to use get elements by class name to affect only the Canadian cities. So Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, and Calgary. So what I've done in my index.html document, I've provided a class to all of the Canadian cities called Canadian City. So this paragraph with Toronto has the class of Canadian City, as do these three here. So let's go and basically write up the code. So the first thing I want to do is I just want to create a variable. I'm going to say let Canadian cities be equal to, and I'm going to say document dot get elements by class name. We have our parentheses because this is a method, and what we need to do is we need to just pass in the class that we're looking to basically get from the document object model. So if we just paste it in there, we now have our Canadian cities. So what I want to do is I just want to log out the Canadian cities so you can see it. So console.log Canadian cities, and if I save and refresh, and we see here we actually get a HTML collection. Okay, so right now we don't actually see, you know, Toronto and Vancouver and Calgary and Montreal. Okay, so HTML collection is a data type we haven't covered in this course, but here's the really cool thing. You can actually change a HTML collection into an array. So let me just basically comment that guy out. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to basically say that Canadian cities, so I'm overriding the value now of Canadian cities, is equal to, and I'm going to say array dot from. This is an inbuilt method in JavaScript whereby what I can do is I can pass in the Canadian cities. So what I'm doing in the first line of our code is I'm using get elements by class name, this inbuilt method. I'm saying document dot get elements by class name, passing in the class Canadian City that we have in our index.html file. I'm storing it in the variable called Canadian Cities. But then what I'm doing here is I'm converting the Canadian Cities, this HTML collection, into an array. Okay, so what we're doing here is we are getting or grabbing the Canadian cities from the document object model. Okay, and then here what I'm doing is I am converting the HTML collection into an array. And the reason that is useful is we've worked with arrays before, and we know how to iterate over the values of an array. So now, if I log out Canadian cities, we should see an array, and that is what we get. We get an array, we see here, it is an array, and we have our Canadian cities there. Okay, that's awesome. So now what I want to do, now that we've converted that to be an array, and you can also check to see if something is an array, by the way. What you do is you say array dot is array and pass in whatever it is you're looking for. So what we'll do is we will actually just log that out to the console. So we'll say console.log, and we're going to pass in this array.isArray, and this should give us a true or false value. Let me just save and refresh, and we get true. Okay, awesome. So we've converted the HTML collection into an array, and we've just double checked to make sure that it actually is an array. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to hook up the button, so when the user clicks on the button, we just log out something to the console, and then once we've done that, instead of just logging something out to the console, what we'll do is we will actually iterate over the elements of the array and change the styling. So the key point about this tutorial is that you can also query the document object model using .getElements by class name, or getElements by class name. So what we can do is we can just say let button be equal to, and we'll use a query selector. So we'll say document.query selector, parentheses, because it's a method, and it is expecting to receive an argument. So we're just going to type in button here. So what we're doing is we're just grabbing the button on the HTML page. There's only one button there, and we're storing it in a button variable. Awesome. Now what I want to do is on the button, let's just put the on click, and what we'll do is we will assign that the value of a function. So you can do a function like so, or you can do an arrow function, it's up to you. If you want to do an arrow function, just delete the function keyword, have your little equal sign and chevron, and then we've got our little arrow there. So now what we have is a button waiting for a user to click it, and if the user clicks on it, we'll just console.log out clicked, semicolon to end the statement there. So let me save and refresh, and if I click here, we get clicked. Awesome. Okay, so now our button is hooked up. We've grabbed the Canadian cities from the document object model, and we've converted them into an array. So now what I want to do is I want to iterate over each element of the array. So there's two ways we can do this. We can write, well, there's a lot of ways to do this, but in this course, what we've covered is you could do a for loop, or you could do a for each, okay? Why don't we do a for loop just for practice? So we'll say for, I want to start counting where our counter variable I is equal to 0, because we know previously that arrays start counting at 0. So we'll say let I be equal to 0. We're going to run while I is less than the Canadian cities dot length. And after each iteration, each time we cycle through the array, we just want to increment our counter variable. And what we'll do is, just to start off, let's just log out all of our Canadian cities to the console. So we'll say console.log Canadian cities, and we want to log out each city depending on whatever index we're on. So the first time we enter the for loop, I has a value of 0. So the first Canadian city will be Toronto. Then what we do is, after we log out Toronto, we come up here to the final expression in the for loop, increment our counter variable, I is a value of 1. So the second element in that array is Montreal. Toronto is at index 0, Montreal is at index 1. So then we log out Montreal. Then we increment our counter variable again, we log out Vancouver, and then we increment our counter variable again, we log out Calgary, and then basically what happens is, because the array length is 4, finally we then check and we say, okay, is 4 less than 4? No, it's not, so we don't run the loop anymore. So now, if I save and refresh, we should see all of our Canadian cities logged out to the console. Oh, we have to press the button, apologies. So we click the button there, and we get our various Canadian cities. So that's awesome, but we don't want to log the Canadian cities out to the console. If we say that to our boss, he'll be, he or she will be like, well, that's great, but have you done what I asked? Have you changed the font to be red? So we want to keep our job working for this fictional airline. So now what I want to do is, instead of just logging out the Canadian city at index I want to maybe change the color. But first of all, if we're going to be doing a few things, I don't want to keep saying, you know, Canadian cities dot style dot color, Canadian cities dot style dot font size, etc. Let's just create a city variable. We'll say let city be equal to Canadian cities at index of I. And now what we can do is, you know, instead of saying Canadian cities dot style dot, you know, color is equal to red, all we need to do is just say city dot style. Visual Studio Code is just being bold here. So city dot style dot color is equal to, and we'll change that to be red. And what we'll also do is we will change the city dot style dot font size to be equal to, we'll say 25 pixels. Okay. So now if I save and refresh, when I press the button, hopefully the Canadian cities will go red and the font size will change. And we do, and that's awesome. And our boss is happy. We've just passed probation in our web development job. Okay, so guys, that's awesome. Key takeaway about this tutorial is another way to query the DOM is you can actually use get elements by class name. Obviously it's a method, so we have our parentheses at the end, and just pass in whatever class you're looking for. In this case, the Canadian cities had a class of Canadian city, and we also saw in this tutorial that we can use the array with a capital letter dot from, and inside of parentheses pass in this case a HTML collection, and convert it to an array. So Canadian cities is now actually an array. On our button, and remember our button, we just said document.querySelector button. There's only one button here in our HTML file, so that is a reference to that button. And when the user clicks on it, we added the dot on click there. We run this arrow function. The arrow function has no name, but when the user clicks on the button, we run the code in between the opening and closing curly brace. And really what it is it's just a for loop iterating over each element of the array, in this case Canadian cities. So Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, Calgary. And what we do is we just, whatever city we're on, we store it in the city variable just to make the text a bit more concise, shorter hand syntax. And then what we do is you just say city.style.color is equal to red, and then city.style.font size is equal to 25 pixels. Okay, that's awesome. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next tutorial where we will continue working with the document object model. Hi everyone, and welcome back. Okay, in this tutorial what we're going to do is we're going to get elements by tag name. So I think what we'll do is we're just going to create a H2, and we'll do a H2 for, we'll do like American cities. And then what we might do is do one for European cities. So we'll say H2 European cities, and just put in an unordered list underneath both. We'll just do maybe 3 cities for each. So unordered list, opening clothing tag. We have our LIs. So let me just copy this out. And what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how you can use get elements by tag name. So for example, if you wanted to get all of the H2s in a document. Okay, so let me just save, copy that. So what we can do here is American cities. So we will say Seattle. We will say Miami, and let's do Dallas. And then European cities, we'll do Athens, we'll do Rome, and we will also do Milan. Okay, so if I save and refresh, we have a completely different setup now. So what I want to do is I just want to show you for the first time how we can use the get elements by tag name. So for example, how do I get all of the heading 2s? So what I could do is I can just say let headings or heading 2s be equal to, and I will say document.get elements by tag name. Okay, and what I'm looking to get is I'm looking to get all of the elements that are essentially a H2 on the page. And if I just say console.log heading 2s, what do we get? Well, let's save and have a look. We get once again a HTML collection. Okay, so what you can do is you can change the content by accessing the variable name we stored them at index 0 to change the content for this heading 2 here, the American cities, because it's the first heading 2 in the document. You could also write code just to change the European cities, or you could do both. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's just change maybe the American cities to be blue and the European to be purple for some reason. So what we could do is we could say heading 2s at index 0. We want to access the style property of that. I can't spell style, apologies. Then we want to access the color, and we want to change that to be blue. So if I now save and refresh, what do we get? We get the American cities are blue. So we were able to use get elements by tag name and then using index notation, so index 0, to change just the American cities, that heading 2. We could also change European cities if we wanted. We might do an awful yellow color. So once again, we could say heading 2 is at index 1, and we could say style.color is equal to, we could change that to be yellow. Okay, so if I save and refresh, that has turned to yellow. It's really awful. And then what we could do is we could just change some of the style attributes of the basically the LIs, so let's say the list items. So what we could do is we could actually say let list items be equal to document.get elements by tag name. And what I want to do is I just want to get a reference to each LI. Okay, so now we got all of the LIs, but what I want to do is I want to affect all of them. Well, the first thing I want to do is I just want to console.log out the list items. Okay, console.log out list items, and let's see what we get. And what we get here is a HTML collection. So it'll be easier if we convert that to an array. So what we can do is we can say list items, and I don't need to use the let keyword. We've already declared and initialized the variable up here, and we'll just convert that to an array. We will say array.from, and then pass in list items to that inbuilt method there. So just to explain what's happening, we are using the document object model on that line to get all of the LIs, all of the list items in the HTML page. And then here what we are doing on this line is we're just essentially converting that HTML collection into an array. Okay? And then now when I log up the list items, what we should see is we actually get an array of list items. Okay? And there we go, and we see it is of type array. Awesome. So now what we could do is we could actually just iterate over all of the list items. So we could say, I'll tell you what, let's do all of these changes only when the user actually presses a button. So what we'll do is just get a reference to the button. We'll use query selector. Okay, so we'll say, we'll do the button down here. So okay, let button be equal to, say document.query selector, and we just want to pass in the type of button. There's only one button on the page, so basically that is just going to get the first button. And then when the user clicks on the button, we're going to run some code. So we'll say button.onClick, put on our event handler there. And then what happens is we're going to run a function, and only when the user clicks on the button will we actually change content. So I'll just paste that in there. So if I save and refresh, now nothing happens to the American and European cities, the heading 2s, until they click the button. We click and they change color. That's awesome. But just to get a bit more practice with the, getting the elements by tag name and actually doing something with it, let's also change the LIs. So basically here what we're doing is we're changing the styles of the heading 2s or the H2s. And then down here, we're going to change the LIs. We're going to change the style of the list items. And I'll just change that to be the same as below. Okay, So now what we want to do is we'll just do a quick for loop. So we'll say for let I is equal to 0. We're going to run the loop while I is less than the list items that array dot length. We've seen this many times down the course, and then increment I++. And what we'll do in this for loop is, just to make sure we have it all working, is we'll just log out to the console the list items at index of I. So we're not going to actually change them yet. We're just going to log them out to the console. So now what happens when the user clicks on the button, we change the headings and we just log out all of the list items to the console. So if I save and refresh, they change color and we get our list items there. Okay, that's awesome. But now what we want to do is we actually want to do something with the list items. So what we'll do is we'll say and bear in mind the list items are actually cities. So we'll say let city be equal to list item at index I, so whatever index we're on. And what we'll do is we'll just say city dot style dot font size. We'll change that to be maybe 20 pixels, and maybe we also as well might just change the line height. So we'll say city dot style dot line height and just change that to be maybe 120%. Okay. Now if I save and refresh, let's see what happens now when we click the button. What we've done is we've changed the styling of the cities and of the H2s. And really the whole point about this tutorial was just to make sure that we are getting a bit of practice with get elements by tag name. So this is another little example now where we've used a different way of querying the DOM to get some sort of element from the HTML page, and we were actually able to manipulate content. So in this case we changed colors and we also changed the styling there of the list items in the unordered lists, and we only did it when a user clicked on a button. So we're just getting a bit more practice here with letting the user behavior affect something on the web page. So that's awesome. That is how we can use the get elements by tag name. Key takeaway is that get elements by tag name is an inbuilt method in JavaScript that we can use to get all of the elements of a particular tag name. It will return a HTML collection, but if you wanted, you can convert it to an array, and that makes it easier to iterate over all the elements. Okay, that's awesome. I'll see you in the next tutorial. Hi everyone and welcome back. Okay, in this tutorial what we're going to do is I am going to show you how you can show and hide content using the document object model. So what I want to do is when the user clicks on a button, we either show the European cities or else we hide the European cities. So what we'll do is we'll actually just delete all the American cities, okay, like that. And what I want to do is I just want to show you that we can change content by accessing the style and then the display content, changing that to be none. So for the unordered list, we'll just in this tutorial we'll do document.getElementById. If I give the unordered list an ID, we'll say European cities. Okay. What I can do is I can actually hide that content. All I need to do is just say let cities be equal to document.getElementById. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is just get the reference to those European cities. So I believe I call them European cities. Okay. Let cities be equal to document.getElementById. European cities there. That's perfect. Okay. Then what I can do is for the cities, I can actually access the style, then the display property, and I can actually set that to be none. So if we save and refresh, what should happen is that everything disappears because I deleted the American cities and the European cities. I've set the display property of the unordered list to be none. So that's great, but really we want to toggle the cities. Like we'll have the button, the user presses it and the cities show, or else they press it again and then the cities are hidden. Okay, so let's get a reference to our button. I'm going to give the button an ID. We could do a query selector, but we'll just say let button ID be equal to button. Okay, and then over here we'll just say let button be equal to document.get element by ID and just pass in button there. So now we have a reference to the button. And now what I want to do is I want to put an event listener on the button. So just say button.onClick. So when the user clicks the button, we're going to assign that the value of a function. We'll just do an arrow function, okay? And now what we want to do is this. We're going to basically create a variable called isShowing and set that to be true. So the first time the user shows, or the first time the page loads, we're going to have isShowing for the European cities. We're going to assign that the Boolean value of true, okay? Because they are showing. If I just save and refresh and prove this to you, we got our European cities showing there. Awesome. Sorry, bear with me. I'll just open up the console. Oh, my computer is acting very odd today. I did not see the inspect button there a moment ago, unless I'm imagining things. I need more tea and coffee. Okay, so what we want to do now is we want to do a check to see if isShowing is true or false. Because if isShowing is equal to true, what do we want to do? Well, we want to actually hide the cities. So what we could do is we could say cities.style.display. We could set that to be none. And now because we've actually hidden the cities, we want to change the value of isShowing to be false, because now they're no longer showing. But if the user presses this button and the cities disappear, I want a way for them to come back, right? So for example, if I save and refresh, if we click on the button, the cities disappear, but now they're gone. So we don't want that. So let's get them back. If the user presses the button again, we could use the else then. We could say else. What we want to do is basically change the display property of cities.style.display and set that to be block. So if you change the display property to block, the cities will reappear. And then what we want to do is we just want to change the isShowing to be true, because now the cities are actually showing again. So if I now save and refresh, we should have a button that when I click it the first time, the cities disappear. But if I click it again, the cities reappear. Okay, awesome. So guys, that is how you can change the display property using the document object model. Whatever it is you're looking to hide or display, just access the style property and display, and you can set the display to be none if you want to hide content, or block, or one of the others if you want to display content. Okay, that's awesome. That was quicker than I thought. So I'll see you in the next tutorial. Hello everyone and welcome back. Okay, in this tutorial I'm going to introduce you to the add event listener method in JavaScript, how we can add an event listener to an element on our page, so that if the user does something, we can also do something. So for example, if the user clicks on this button, maybe we'll change all the list items, the European cities, to be blue. So far we've seen how we can do this using onClick, but I want to show you a more versatile way of doing this, whereby you can listen out for other types of events as well. So our mind is going to be blown in this tutorial. Okay, so what I'm going to do is on the button, I'm going to use dot notation, and I'm going to say add event listener. Add event listener is this inbuilt method in JavaScript that we can use to listen out for a user event. In this tutorial, we're going to cover two arguments that we can pass in. The first is what type of event you are listening out for, and we're going to listen out for a user click, okay? And then once the user clicks on the button, so remember button, all I did was we have one button on the page, it has an ID of button, so I said document.getElement by ID, I passed in the ID and I stored it in the variable button, so this button here is a reference to the only button on the page, or that one there, okay? So basically what I'm doing now is I am adding an event listener. I'm saying button.addEventListener. The first argument I'm passing in is a click, so when the user clicks on the button, something must happen. And the second parameter that we need to define, or the second argument to be passed in, is basically the code you want to run or execute when the user clicks on the button. And we know that's a fancy way of saying a function. So we can just say function and then have our curly braces, okay? You can also do an arrow function here as well if you want to. So we'll do that in a moment. So all I want to do, just to make sure our event listener is working, is just say console.log. You clicked me, okay? Semicolon to end statement. And let's just save and refresh. And now we get you clicked me. So that's awesome. This is the first time really in the course now where we've actually really added an event listener using the event listener method, okay? So it gives us more power. Now, just so you know, you can also change that to be an arrow function. So you can delete the function keyword and do the equal sign chevron if you want. And that should still work. Just to prove that to you, let's have two console.logs. Now let's save and refresh. And we get you clicked me. Okay, that's awesome. But instead of just doing you clicked me, let's change the European cities to be blue. So what we can do is we can say cities.style. Remember, we've already grabbed the cities because what we've done is we've said European cities is the ID for the unordered list. And we just said document.get element by ID European cities and stored it in cities. So we're saying cities.style.color is equal to, we'll just say blue. So let's now save and refresh. And they turn blue. Okay, awesome. They're a bit small, so you could also change the font size as well if you wanted. You could say cities.style.font size, maybe change them to be 20 pixels. They look a bit small. So if we save and refresh. Okay, awesome. Right, so we've added an event listener and it does something. It changes text color to be blue and changes the font size. Now what I want to do is I want to comment this out, okay? And I want to show you now how when we click the button, nothing is going to happen because we've commented out our code. And this time, what I want to do is I want to add a different type of event listener. I want to add an event listener whereby the color changes when the user just presses any key on their keyboard. So I'm going to be bold. I'm going to actually delete the button, okay? And I'm going to say press any button. We'll say press any key. Which one's the any key for anyone who likes The Simpsons? Okay, any key. Maybe we should have a space there. That's just semantics, Dara. Okay, so basically now what I want to do is I want to write code where we change the color, but how do we do it? Well, why don't we add an event listener? And here's the really cool thing. You can add an event listener to the entire document. So you don't have to add an event listener just to an element. You can do it on the entire window or web page if you want. So how you could do that is you would say document dot add event listener. Okay, I'll keep this simple. So the first parameter, what we're looking out for, we'll say key press. Okay, so when the user clicks on a key, and we won't do an arrow function, we'll keep it simple enough because we're doing an event listener on the entire page and key press is new. So try to keep this as simple as possible. But now what I want to do is just do what we did up here. We'll just say cities.style.color is equal to blue, and we will say cities.style.font size is equal to 20 pixels. Okay, so now if I save and refresh, okay, what will happen is when I go back to this page here, if I press on any key on my keyboard, our code should run. I'll press the letter J, and boom, look at that. So you'll have to believe me, but I did press J. So guys, that's awesome. So key takeaway from this tutorial, there is another way you can listen out for user events, and it is by adding an event listener. You can add an event listener to a specific element on the page, like we did up here with the button, but you can also add it to the entire web page using document. To add an event listener, once you've decided what you want to add an event listener to, i.e. the element, specific element, or the document, you simply say dot add event listener. Note the use of uppercase E, uppercase L. Then you have your parentheses. First argument is basically what it is you're listening out for. Are you listening for a user click? Are you listening out for the user pressing down a key on their keyboard? Then you run your function. So here's how you do an arrow function. Here's how you do it like the old way, the function keyword and our parentheses. And then inside of the curly braces, you just run your code like normal. Okay guys, that's awesome. That is how you can add an event listener using JavaScript in the document object model. Hopefully I'll see you in the next tutorial. Hello everyone and welcome back. Okay, in this tutorial what we're going to do is I am going to show you how the document object model can actually create elements in JavaScript. So we can create essentially anything we want. We could create a H2, a heading 2. We could create a heading 3. We could create a paragraph. We could even create an unordered list if we wanted to and add list items. So we can create elements in JavaScript. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a H3. We will store that in a variable. We'll call it heading 3 and we will just log that out to the console. So I will say let heading 3, so it's a heading, be equal to, and how do we create an element in JavaScript? Well, we can ask the document to do it for us. We can say document dot create element. So there's a create element here, inbuilt method, and inside of parentheses we have to pass in essentially an argument. What is it that we are looking to create? And what you'll notice is there's an awful lot of various different elements we can create. So we're going to create a H3 just for practice. So if I now save and refresh, what I want to do is I just want to log out console.log heading 3 just so you can see that we've actually created a H3 in JavaScript. So what we've done here is we've used the document object model to create a H3, and remember a H3 is an element with both an opening and closing tag. Okay, so if I save and refresh, let's go here to the browser. So we've logged out our H3, so that's pretty cool. So we know it exists, so we've created it here, and we know it exists because we've logged it out to the console. But what's interesting is if you inspect the elements on the page, you'll notice there doesn't seem to be any H3 there. And if I open up the body, there's no H3 that I can see, okay? So good and bad news. The good news is we can create elements, okay? But we haven't actually appended it anywhere. We haven't actually put it anywhere on the page. So do you remember in functions we saw that you can create or define a function, and that's great. But until you actually call or invoke the function doesn't run. It's almost a similar idea here when you create elements. Creating the element is the first part, but if you want it to be on your website, on the web page, you have to specify where you want it. And that is where the append child comes in, okay? So why don't we append our heading 3 to the page? Well, what we can do to do that is we can say document dot body. So using dot notation, I'm saying to the document access the body, and then body on that I want to append a child. So we can append child. So append child is another inbuilt method in JavaScript we can use to essentially append or add whatever element we want to the body. Okay, so how this works is you decide what it is you want to append something onto, in this case the body, okay, something, and then we use dot append child, and what do we want to append on? We want to append on this H3 that we've created, and we store that in a variable called H3. So what we can do is just copy that, paste that in there, and now semicolon and save. So now what we've done is we've taken the H3 we've created and we have appended it to the body, okay? So if I save and refresh and we come back here, what we get, well, we don't see it first of all, but if we inspect the body, we open up here, you'll notice that we've added the H3. So the problem with just appending that onto the body is it's quite random, right? I mean, we've just basically created content and added it randomly onto the page, but it doesn't seem to benefit us very much. So what we're going to do in the next tutorial is we might maybe get user input and then add that onto our list. We'll do something like that. But just before we finish this tutorial, I want to actually ask you if you can use the document object model to create a paragraph, okay? So it's all well and good looking at these videos, but we have to get you thinking. So please use the DOM to create a paragraph, and then what I want you to do is I want you to append it to the body in the same way we did with the heading 3. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to delete all of that code, okay? And let's do this challenge together. So feel free to do it yourself. So basically, deleted everything. If I save and refresh, We've no paragraph there. Okay. So what, and there doesn't have to be, text in the paragraph. Although you could, in theory, use the inner HTML if you wanted, but that's a skip ahead. For now, let's just create a paragraph and then append it to the body. So what do? Well, we know what we can do is we can say document dot create element. So we're using that inbuilt method in JavaScript, okay? And what do we want to create? We want to create a paragraph. So that's awesome. And then what I'll do is I'll take the new paragraph we've created and we'll store it in a variable. So we'll say const key is equal to, we can say paragraph. Okay, so we've created a variable called paragraph and we've assigned it the value of a new paragraph. So once again, remember, the paragraph is an element with both a closing and opening tag. So that's what we have created. Now what we need to do is we need to append it onto the body of the web page. So we can just say document dot notation to access the body, and on the body let's call or invoke that inbuilt method append child, and all we need to do is just decide what it is we're trying to append onto the document. Well, it's this paragraph we've created up here, isn't it? So if we just save, paste that in there, we are now appending the paragraph element that we've created and basically adding it to the body. So if I save and refresh, we should see a random paragraph. It isn't very helpful, but it's the first step. We're learning to use the document object model to create elements for the first time. So there we go. We see there, we've got our little p tags. So that's awesome. I hope you enjoyed that tutorial. We learned that the document object model can also be used to create elements in JavaScript, which is pretty awesome. And we've learned how to append an element onto something else, another element, or in this case, the body, in this tutorial. So that's cool, but why don't we do some more advanced stuff and cool stuff in the next tutorial? So I will hopefully see you then for more document object model learning. Hi everyone and welcome back. Okay, in this tutorial what we're going to do is we're going to create a placeholder with a button. We're going to pretend we work for an airline and we want to ask our potential passengers where they want to fly to. So for example, if they type in London and click add a city, we've created a list item and we've added it to our list. Or if they maybe say Berlin, we add that to the list. Okay, so that's what we're going to have to look forward to in this tutorial. Obviously, if I refresh, the content disappears because we haven't hard coded it. Hard coded being, for example, the way I've actually wrote out Athens, Rome, Milan in the HTML. If you want text to be created and for it to stay, you'd actually have to hook up a database. Okay, so let's write the code for this. Unfortunately, you've seen a bit of it. Let me just delete all that really quick. Okay, save, and let's do it all from scratch. So the button and the input was just to show you what that looked like. So if I just save and refresh now, we're going to do this all from scratch. Okay, so I'll try and move through the HTML pretty quickly because this course is about JavaScript, but obviously then this part of the course is about the document object model, and that's really all about manipulating HTML content. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create our input. So we'll have input of type equal to text. And then what we're going to do is just self-enclose that tag there. So if I save and refresh, we should have now a little text box there. That's awesome. Let's have a placeholder, just a message that the user can see. So we will say enter a city. Enter a city. So we just save and refresh that now. We have a little placeholder. Awesome. And then lastly, what I want to do is just give it an ID, because later in the video, we're going to just get a reference to whatever text was input. So we'll say text input for the city text input. City text input, yeah. City text input sounds good to me. Okay, next thing we need to do now is create a button. So let's just create a button with our opening and closing tag, and we will say add a city. So now if I save and refresh, we have added a button to our web page. Awesome. Okay. And then lastly, you could do a query selector, but I'm just going to give this an ID of button, and we'll get a reference to the button using the get element by ID. So we've created our text field. Next thing we need to do is we need to add an event listener to the button. When the user clicks on that button, we're going to run a function, And what we're going to do is we're going to create a list item. And obviously we don't want that to be an empty list item. At some point we're going to have to set the inner text of that to what the user input was. And then we need to append that to our city list, okay? So that's what we have to do in this tutorial. So right now, if I refresh and click on the button, nothing happens. If I type in London, nothing happens at all, okay? So no functionality has been set up. So the first thing we're going to do is let's create a variable called button in our script file. So we'll say, we can do const, we'll say const button. We're not going to be changing this variable's value. So this is going to be equal to document dot get element by ID. So we're getting a reference to an element from the document object model. And what do we want to get? Which element? We want to grab this button here. So this button has an ID of button. So we can paste in, copy and paste in button. And then what I want to do is I just want to log out to the console button just to make sure we've got it. So throughout this video tutorial, I'll be logging out to the console every step of the way just to make sure we've everything working. And if you're following along, it's just easier for you as well. Console is not a function. What did I do there? Oops, console.log. Apologies. I promised to get a coffee at this tutorial. Maybe an iced coffee. Okay, awesome. So there we go, we have our button. Okay, now that's really good, but what I want to do is, I don't want to just log the button out to the console, I want to add an event listener to it. So on our element, in this case the button, we're going to say add event listener, that inbuilt method in JavaScript. We have our parentheses, and oh my god, there was a noise there in my room. I think I'll keep coding and I'll figure out what that was later. I hope I haven't been invaded by an animal, like a raccoon or something. Maybe something just fell over. Maybe it's outside, actually. Anyway, okay. We have our click. And please leave me in peace. I'm trying to code function. Okay, there we go. Now what we're going to do is just log out to the console. Console.log. We'll say button clicked. You know what it is, my window's open. So I'm just hearing something probably more dramatically. I hope nothing's in my room. Okay, button clicked. Awesome. Okay. Now what we want to do is we don't actually just want to, click on the function and, log something out to the console. Let's actually do something. So what we want to do here, I'll just change that to an arrow function, is we actually want to create an element, don't we? That's what we want to do. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new element, and remember the element is going to be a list item. It's going to be an li because we're trying to add to the list. So we could call it new list item, or we can call it new city. I'm going to just be overly descriptive and call it new city list item. So we'll say new city list item, because I don't want to keep saying it's a list item and then it's a new city. I'll just make it consistent. And what does that equal to? Well, we're going to say document dot, on this we're going to say create element, that inbuilt method in JavaScript. And what element do we want to create? We want to create a list item, okay? So that's good, we've created a list item, but we haven't actually appended it anywhere. But just to make sure the list item has actually been created, I just want to log it out to the console. So I'm going to say console.log, and then the new list item we've created, we've stored it in a variable called new city list item. So let's log out new city list item to the console. So now what's happening is, we've written up the code, we've gotten the button, we've added an event listener to it, okay, because button is a variable, assigned the value of the button. We've added an event listener to it, that when the user clicks on it, we're going to create a list item, because we've said document.createElement list item. We've passed in list item as an argument. And then what we're doing is we're just storing that in a variable called new city list item, and then we're just logging this out. So when we click on the button, we should see just an empty list item in the console. And we do. Okay, that's awesome. Now, the next thing we want to do is we want to get the text, okay, and then set that to be something. So why don't we do that? Well, we know what we need to do is we need to essentially get the user input. That's one thing we need to do. So let's get the user input. No, tell you what, we also need to do the cities as well. So we'll say we'll use document.getElement by ID to just store in variables the city list and then the user input. Okay, So what I'll do here is underneath button, we'll just say const and we'll say city list is equal to document.getElement by ID. So what I'm doing here is I just want to get from the document object model the list, the unordered list of European cities. So let's do that. Awesome. And then what we want to do is we also want to get the user text. So we'll say user text input is equal to document.getElement by ID. And what user input is it? Well, the user input is going to be the city text input. We'll talk about getting the actual value of that out in a moment, right? So what we've done now is we've just got a reference to everything. So we've basically grabbed our elements from the DOM, okay? And then down here, what we're doing is we're writing out the function, writing the functionality. Okay, awesome. So now what do we want to do? Well, we've created our list item, okay? But we just logged it out to the console. So we don't want to do that. What we want to do is we actually want to take the new list item we've created, i.e. the new city list item, and append that onto the city list, okay? So how we do that is we just say city list dot append child, and what we're going to append on is this new city list item, okay? Now the problem so far with the code is we haven't actually done anything with the user input. So for example, if I save and refresh, if I click here, we've created a list item, but you notice that it has no value, okay? So even if I was to type in something, it has no value, okay? It's just an empty list item. To prove that to you, if I just log out to the console, console.log new city list item, what you'll find is we're creating the list item. So here we are creating a list item. And remember, list item is opening li and closing li. We're basically just creating an HTML element. We are appending it onto the list. We are appending the li onto the unordered list, okay? But we haven't actually got the user input. And to prove that to you, the fact now we're logging out the list item, if I click here, we're getting a list item, but it has no value. So that's not good. So how do we actually get the user input? Well, remember, the input text box has an ID of city text input, right? If I just copy that. So what we can do here, and then we've gotten it, the user text input, and we've stored it in the user text input. So now what I could do is instead of logging out to the console the empty list item, let's log out the user text input and see what we get, okay? We're actually not quite going to get what you think. Let me just show you. If I type in London and add city, what we're actually getting when we log out to the console, we're just getting the entire element itself. We're not actually getting the value. So how you would actually change that is you would say user text input dot value. This is how we can actually access whatever input has been typed by the user. So now if I save and refresh, if I type London and click add city, we're still getting an empty list item being created and appended to the list, but we've logged out to the console now the actual value. So now what we want to do is, instead of just logging out the value of, whatever the user had input, what we actually want to do is, before we actually append the city list to before we append the new city list item to the city list, what we actually want to do is, we want to take the inner text of the new city list item. So remember, in the line above, we've actually created a list item, okay, but it has no value. So we know we want to change that. So how would we change that? Well, you could set it to be equal to the inner text to be equal to something, okay? So now what would happen is, if I was to just create an empty string, I could assign that some value, maybe like hello world, right? So what I've done here is, after we've created the list item, I've actually set its inner text to be hello world. But that's no good to us, right? Because what happens now if we save and refresh? Well, if I type in London again and click add city, what we've done is we've created a list item, we've successfully added it to the European cities, but we hard-coded the text to be hello world. We don't want that, we want it to be London. But guess what? We've access to London here. We've logged it out to the console. So what we need to do is, instead of assigning the new list item that was created, and we've called that new city list item, instead of assigning its inner text to be this string here, why don't we assign it the value of whatever the user text input was, okay? So now what you do is just copy that and paste that there. So what we're doing here is, after we create the list item, we are changing the inner text of the list item to be the same as the user input, okay? And now there's no need to log that out to the console. There is one problem though with this code, and I'll show you now what the problem is. If we refresh again, and I type out London, and I click Add City, we've added London to the unordered list, which is great. But if I want to add another city, I have to delete London and then do that. You know, and now I've added Berlin, and now I have to delete Berlin. So we just want to create a function whereby we just essentially set the text of the text box to be an empty string after we've basically done all of these steps. So after we've created a list item, after we've changed its inner text, and after we've added that new list item or appended it onto the unordered list, what we want to do is we just want to create a function that will clear the text box for us. So anytime we create a function, we want to make code reusable. So we will create a function to clear the text box. I'm going to create an arrow function, okay? So we're just going to call it clear text, okay? It's going to be an arrow function that doesn't take any arguments or parameters. And all we're going to do is we're going to take whatever the user input is, okay? We're going to clear it. But we're only doing that after we've got the user input and basically update, you know. So we're not, let me start again. We're not going to change the user input's value to an empty string until after we've taken their input and appended it onto the unordered list, okay? So I've created the arrow function here, and now what we can do here is we can just call or invoke that clear text function, okay? So now what we're doing is as follows. When the user clicks on the button, we're doing 4 things. We're creating the list item, and we saw how to do that. We just say document.createElement, and inside of parentheses, we pass in what it is we're trying to create to the inbuilt method createElement. We're creating a list item. Then we store it in the variable called new city list item. Then what we do is for the new variable we've created, new city list item, we take its inner text, we say dot inner text, and we assign it the value of whatever the user had typed in, okay? Because remember, user text input, we have a reference to it, we just access the value. Then what we do is we take the unordered list and we take the list item and we append it onto the unordered list by saying city list, or unordered list of European cities, dot append child, new city list item. And then once that's been done, to clear the text box, we call or invoke our clear text function, and that is just an arrow function up here. And what it does is it takes the user text input, and remember this is a global variable, so this function can access it. We take its value and just assign it the value of an empty string. And now what happens is if I save and refresh, if I type in London, London is now added to the unordered list. And if I type in Berlin, Berlin has now been added to the unordered list. Okay, awesome. So guys, that is how we can use the document object model to actually basically get user input, create an element, change the inner text of that element, and append it on to an element that already exists on the page, in this case the city list. And then we just wrote a little function to clear the inner text of the text box. We just set it empty, or set it equal to an empty string. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that tutorial. That was really good practice with the document object model. I have to say I enjoyed that tutorial, and I will see you hopefully in the next one for more learning. Hi everyone and welcome back. Okay, in this tutorial what we're going to do is we're going to actually remove elements from our web page using the document object model. So the first method I want to show you is the remove method. How this works essentially is you take whatever element it is you're trying to remove, and using dot notation just call or invoke the remove method, okay? So how does this work? Well, on our web page we have this heading 2 and a H1. So let's just remove both, okay? We'll just get a bit of practice. So how would we remove the H1? Well, what we could do is we could create a variable and then we could remove it. So we could say let heading1 be equal to document.querySelector, and we're just going to pass in h1. So this query selector will return the first heading1 on the page. There's only one heading1, okay? So now what I could do is on heading1, I could call or invoke the remove method by just saying remove, semicolon to end the statement, and what this will do is remove the heading1. To prove that to you, if I refresh, the heading1 is gone. You could also, if you wanted, remove the heading2, okay? So heading2, let's give this one an ID. You could do a query selector as well, but I'll just say h2 we'll give it an ID of heading2. So just for practice, what we'll do this time is we'll say let heading1 be equal to heading2, apologies. Dara, drink more of your tea. I actually have tea beside me. Let me take a sip here. Awesome, I feel better already. Okay, document.get element by ID. And what did we call it? We called it heading2. We could just do query selectors the whole way, but I kind of like to use the selectors interchangeably. You know, query selector, get element by ID, just for your own practice, okay? So here we're getting our elements, and looks like here we're writing the code to get rid of them. So to remove heading2, you just say heading2 dot remove parentheses. So here what we're doing now is we're removing both the heading1 and the heading2 variables from the page, and the variables are actually basically actual HTML elements. So now if I save and refresh, you see here that both the headings have disappeared. Okay, if I delete the code, save and refresh, we should get our heading1 and our heading2 back. Okay, that's awesome. So guys, that is how you can remove an element from the page. On the element, just call or invoke the remove method in JavaScript. You can also remove a child element of a parent by calling or invoking the remove child method. How this one works is you have some sort of element, and on that you remove the child by calling or invoking the remove child method, and this element, this inbuilt method is actually expecting to receive an element passed in as an argument. What element are you looking to remove? So what we can do is actually create a parent element, maybe for the unordered list, and then remove a list item off of it. So what we could do is we could say let parent be equal to document dot, let's see, we have an ID here for the unordered list, so let's grab that. So this time we'll say document dot get element by ID, and then we're going to pass in that ID there of European cities. So now what we should have is the unordered list stored in the parent variable. Just to prove that to you, if I save and refresh, we see here we have the unordered list. That's awesome. Then what I want to do is I want to remove the very first element. So Athens is there, okay? We want to remove Athens from our list, okay? So remember, that's our list. So how do we do this? Well, what we can do is we can create a child. We'll say let child be equal to document dot, and this time what we'll do is we'll get elements by tag name. So we'll say get elements by tag name, and we're going to pass in li. So li is for the list item, and then what we're going to do is we're going to access the first list item, and that will be at 0. Okay, so now if I say console.log child, we should see that we're getting Athens. Okay, let me just save and refresh. We see here we get Athens. So what we could do now, if we wanted to remove Athens from the parent, is we could call or invoke the remove child. Now remember, the first thing you need to do is decide what element you're trying to remove something from. So parent is our unordered list. So I'm going to say parent dot remove child, and then we have our parentheses because we're invoking the method, and we're going to pass in child. Remember, child is basically just Athens. And if I now save and refresh, Athens is now gone, okay? You could, for example, remove something else. So for example, if we were to change that to be 1, if we now save and refresh, Athens comes back, and it looks like we lost Rome. Okay, awesome. So guys, that is how you can use the remove method and the remove child method to basically remove elements from the page using the document object model. That's awesome. I'll see you in the next one. Hey everyone, and welcome back. Okay, in this tutorial I'm going to make you aware about another superpower we have using the document object model, and that is that we can actually change or set the attribute of an element. So some elements have additional information. Okay, so for example, in HTML, if you create a link using anchor tags, you want to sort of give the link more information. Where is it a link to? So for example, a href. So for example, if I was to create an anchor tag, opening and closing anchor tag, and I write Google, this isn't actually going to link to Google, okay? For obvious reasons, I've just wrote Google inside of the anchor tags. So if I save and refresh, if I click Google, well I can't actually click on it. So certain elements in HTML require additional information. So for example, a link will require a href. Where do you want me to link to? An image will require a source. What is the image of? There's no point having just an image tag. You also need to provide additional information. So there are certain elements in JavaScript that have basically additional information, okay? Whether it is a CSS styling, an attribute like a href, an attribute like a source, etc. I wrote style twice, apologies. But essentially, yes, there are certain elements that require additional information. Where does a link go to? What is the picture, the image of, etc. So you've seen this before. So for example, you can create an anchor tag for Google, and maybe you might provide a href. So where is this linking to? And you could say https google.com, okay? Also, I like to always use target_blank, so that way when you click on the link, it opens up in a new tab. So if I just save and refresh, I already have Google open, but if I click it again, we are going to load Google. Okay, so that is a link that has an attribute, a href, a link to somewhere. But what we can do is we can actually change the href if we want it, because there's an inbuilt method in JavaScript where you can set an attribute. So the set attribute method essentially is expecting to receive two arguments passed in. First of all, the name, okay, so what is it you're looking to change? Is it, for example, the source of an image? Is it, for example, a href? And then the next thing you need to pass in is the new value. So for example, if you were to call the set attribute method on an element, in this case, for example, an anchor tag, what you could do is set the attribute, tell the inbuilt method in JavaScript that you want to change the href, and then provide it with a new string. Okay, so you can use this to change, as I say, a style, a href for a hyperlink, a source, okay, for a video or an image, etc. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to do that. So basically our href here, we could give it an ID, so we'll say ID is equal to, we'll say our link, okay, or search link, because this is about a search engine. So we'll say search link. So what I'll do now is I will use the document object model to grab that link. I'll say document.getElementById. And what we want to do, we want to pass in the ID there, and we called it search link, okay? Search link. Probably not a great name. And then what I want to do is I want to just basically create a variable. Say let link be equal to document.getElementById. You could also do query selector and just query for an anchor tag. You could do that as well. So what we can do now is just console.log out the link. Just want to make sure that I have that. So if I save and refresh, we see here we have our hyperlink. Okay, that's awesome. But what I want to do now is I actually want to change the href. So how do we do that? Well, on our link, let's use dot notation and call or invoke the set attribute method. So what do we want to do? Well, the first thing is we have to let this method know what we're changing, and we want to change the href. And then the next thing we need to do is basically say, okay, what are we changing the value to? There's this other search engine I found called DuckDuckGo. I've never actually used them, but what we're going to do is we're just actually going to change the hyperlink. So instead, what we'll do inside of a string is we'll say HTTPS and then paste in DuckDuckGo. Okay, I've really messed that up. Let me try that again. I'm in need of a coffee. Okay, awesome. So now if I save and refresh, let me just delete both of that. Well, close down, not delete. If I now save and refresh, if I click on the link, we actually go to DuckDuckGo. And that is because what happened was, even though initially our anchor tag had a href to Google, inside of our script file, what we did was we got the link, we stored it in a variable called link, and we called or invoked the setAttribute method. We were looking to change the href, the hyperlink, and this is the new value that we passed in. Okay, that's awesome. I'll see you in the next tutorial. Hi everyone and welcome back. Okay, in this tutorial what we're going to do is we're going to set up a button so that when the user clicks on the button, we actually change the styling for these cities. But how we're doing it is we're actually changing the CSS class associated with the unordered list. So I'll show you what I did and then we can do it together. What I did first of all was I created a style sheet. I called it style.css and we have two classes here. We have a blue text class and a red text class. Obviously in the blue text class I just set the color to be blue, and in the red text I just set the color to be red. Okay. In the index.html file I've just linked to the CSS file. So I've said link rel is equal to style sheet, type is equal to text/CSS. I could have just said CSS, but old habits die hard, I guess. And then href is equal to style.css, i.e. the name of our style sheet. So this tutorial series is all about JavaScript, so no need for us to delve too much into CSS styling. But essentially what I did was, on the unordered list called European cities, I gave it a class called blue text. So blue text is why, if I refresh, the text goes blue, okay? Then what I did was, in the JavaScript file, I just got a reference to the button. There's only one button, so I said document.querySelector button is equal to button. I used document.getElementById to get the European cities, and I stored it in the list variable. And then all I did was I said button.addEventListener. When there is a click, we run a function, and all we do essentially is just, on the list, the European cities, I just set the attribute. I set the class, so what it is we're looking to change, so the name, and then what's the new value? Red text, okay? So I'm going to write all this code out again from scratch, but just to show you once again what we're trying to work up to, the text is blue, but if we click on the button, we change it to red, okay? And how we've done that is we've essentially changed the CSS class. So if I just delete this from scratch, we can start again. Okay, so now if I just save and refresh, we have blue text, but this does nothing. So let's write out our code together. Well, we know first of all we're going to need to get a reference to our button in our JavaScript file. Let me move the script file here. So I will say let button be equal to, so we could use query selector, or you could give the button an ID of button. I'll just say ID is equal to button. I think what I'll do is I'll just do two get element by ID. So we'll say document.get element by ID. And I'm just gonna copy and paste that below for the list. But essentially what we're doing is we're just going to get the button, okay? So let button be equal to document.getElementById. by ID. Awesome. Feel free to log out the button to the console just to make sure you've gotten it. Then we'll create a city list variable. I'll call it city list, and that's going to be equal to, well, this is why I copied, document.getElementById, by ID, and we're just going to paste in our ID of European cities. So far in this course, I would log, both of those out to the console just to make sure we've gotten them. But hopefully you're getting a bit more comfortable now with what we're doing. I'm hopeful this will work. So, well, I'm confident. So on the button, what we're going to do is we're going to say button.addEventListener. Okay. So what are we listening out for? Well, we're going to listen out for a user click. Okay. And then what we're going to do is when the user clicks on the button, we're going to run a function. But instead of using the function keyword, what we're going to do is just essentially do an arrow function like that. And then all we need to do is, on our city list, remember, when you're setting an attribute, you have to decide what element it is you're trying to change, okay? So I'm trying to change the city list, and remember, city list is just a variable, but I've said document.getElementById European cities. So city list is actually the unordered list here, including the list items. So what I want to do is on the city list, I want to use dot notation to access the set attribute method, okay? And what I want to change, because remember you have to decide with set attribute, are you trying to change a link, you know? Are you trying to change a CSS styling, a class? So we're going to change the class. And then what do we want to change it to? What new value are we changing it to? Well, in the style sheet, we're going to change it to be red text. So we have our quotes, and then I just pass in red text and semicolon to end the statement. And now if I save and refresh, when I click on the button, the text goes red. Okay, awesome. So guys, that is how you can use the set attribute method in JavaScript to change the class in the CSS file. I'll see you in the next tutorial. Hey everyone, and welcome back. Okay, in this tutorial I'm going to talk to you about the class list in JavaScript. So the class list essentially is an inbuilt property we can use, and what it is essentially is it will return basically the CSS class names of an element. So before we start talking about adding a class list, deleting and toggling a class list, first I just want to explain a bit more what it is, but then I want to show you what it actually looks like. For example, if I look here at our unordered list with an ID of European cities, it has a class here of blue text. So if I was to log out to the console, the class list for that element, and remember we've taken the unordered list and we've put it into the city list variable. So if I was to log out, for example, console.log, we have our parentheses, and then if I say city list, i.e. the name here of our unordered list, and if I use dot notation and access the class list, that should return to me all of the classes, the class names on this element. So that's what it is. And we can use it to actually add a class, delete a class, and toggle a class. So let me just firstly show you what it looks like. So I'm going to say console.log, city list, dot notation, I'm going to access the class list. So all we're just doing is logging out to the console, the class list for our unordered list, which we've called, what do we call it here? City list. Awesome. So if I save and refresh, we see here, we get this thing called the DOM token list. But what you notice is we have this blue text. So basically what it's saying is, okay, there is a class called blue text. Awesome. Now, you could, for example, add another class to this if you wanted. So for example, we could add the red text class as well. That will obviously override the value of the blue text, but let's just do it anyway. So if I just comma separate here and put in the red text class as well, so what will happen on the page is the red class is overridden the blue text class, but you'll see here we have the blue text and we have the red text. Okay, so basically the class list will provide you with the names of the CSS classes, the styling classes essentially, that are currently on that element. Okay, so what I want to do is I was going to say remove red text, but actually I'll show you how you can add and delete. So basically another thing you can do is you can actually as well say that you want to add, delete, or toggle. So we'll do add first. So for example, there's this uppercase text class. So let's actually add that class to our city list. So all you need to do is, to do this, you basically just take the element and then using dot notation, access the class list and then whatever method you're looking to do. So for example, are you looking to add, delete, or toggle? Okay, so that's the format. So what we want to do is on our city list, we are actually going to use dot notation to access the class list, and then what we're going to do is we're going to say add, and this is an inbuilt method in JavaScript, and what we need to do is pass in the name of the class. Now we don't actually need to use the little dot there, okay, these essentially, you know, that kind of selector. Just copy the name of the class, okay, so that's all you need to do. So if we just paste that in here, what we will find now is if we were to log out this to the console, we've actually added that class. I can actually prove that to you, by the way, without logging out to the console. What you'll notice here is that actually the text is now gone to uppercase. So basically there's 3 classes now on this European cities. There's the blue text, which is now being overridden by the red text, and lastly we've also added our uppercase text class. So all 3 classes are now being applied. To prove that to you, I'll log this out to the console. I will say console.log citylist, Dara, can you not spell? Citylist.classlist, okay? And now if I save and refresh, we see here we're getting our DOM token list again, but we have the blue text, the red text, and the uppercase text. So this is the class list in JavaScript, but instead of just logging out to the console, you can also delete classes as well. So why don't we delete the red text class, because it's kind of annoying me. Red's a very aggressive color. So to do that, so obviously here what we've done is we've actually added a class, and what we'll do now is we will actually delete a class. So to do that, we can say citylist dot class list dot, and then we can do remove. Okay, so that should be remove, apologies. So you're actually removing a class. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to pass in the name of the class we want to get rid of, and that is the red text. Okay, so if we just paste it in there, inside of quotes, so opening and closing. If I now do semicolon, when we refresh, we should see here that the red class has been removed. The reason the text isn't blue, remember, is that we've actually just basically applied this class. Okay, so it's been overridden. Okay, okay, awesome. So then, what do we want to do next? Let's just toggle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete these classes here completely. Okay, and what I want to do is I want to show you then the toggle. Okay, so the toggle is that how you can essentially toggle on and off class. So come down here, and I'm going to show you now toggle. But let's do it based on a user click. So when the user clicks on the button, we'll toggle on and off the blue styling. So if I just save and refresh, just to make sure we've gone back to blue here. We have not. Why is that? Blue text. We just save. We want to get this back to blue. Awesome. Okay. Let me just delete the other code I wrote here. Okay. So now what we want to do is I just want to write a function. So when the user on the change color, we basically go from blue to black and then black to blue essentially. Okay. So how we do that is as follows. On our button, so remember, in our index.html file, we have this button here with an ID of button, and what we've done is we've said document.getElementById button. We're using the document object model to grab the button from the DOM, and we've stored it in the variable button. What I want to do here is on our button variable add an event listener. So we'll say add event listener. What are we listening out for? We're listening out for a user click, and what happens when they click on the button? We're going to run a function. Okay, I won't do an arrow function today. And then what do we want to do here? Well, what we want to do is we want to get the city list, use dot notation. We want to access the class list, okay? And then what we want to do is we want to access the inbuilt toggle method. And what this will do is it will toggle on and off the class called blue text, okay? So if I now save and refresh, if I click here, we've toggled off the blue text class. But if I click the button again, we actually toggle it back on. Okay, awesome. So guys, that is the class list in JavaScript. You can add a class, you can remove a class, and you can also toggle. And if you want to as well, instead of saying citylist.classlist, you could, for example, override the value of citylist up here. So you could say, so citylist is equal to citylist, i.e. itself, dot classlist, okay? So just so you don't have to keep typing this out over and over again if you were to do that. And if you were to delete this, that should still work, because what we've done is essentially we've taken the class list of the city list and stored it in the city list variable, and therefore we're just toggling that directly there. So if I save and refresh, hopefully I don't embarrass myself now. If I click here, it goes to black and then back to blue. Okay, awesome. So guys, that is the class list in JavaScript. The class list will return the CSS class names of an element, and using the document object model, you can add, remove, and toggle classes. There's some other stuff you can do as well, so I encourage you to look into this in more detail yourself if that's what you want to do. Okay, awesome. I'll see you in the next tutorial. Okay, in this tutorial, I'm going to introduce you to another event listener, and that is mouse over. So far in this course, we've really only been able to listen out for a user click or if the user presses any key on their keyboard. But another cool one I want to introduce you to is mouse over. So mouse over might be if some content on the page, for example, I created this H4, and if I hover on it, something happens. Maybe we log something out of the console. That's a bit boring. So maybe we actually alert something out, to the user. Where do you think you're going? Or flights are on sale now. So what I want to do is add an event listener to that H4. So what I did was I just created a H4. Okay, I'm going to give this an ID of promotion. So we'll say H4 ID, we'll say special promotion. We don't really need to give this an ID, by the way. You could just do a query selector H4, but I suppose it's better, convention to be very specific, I guess. Okay, so we'll say we say pop-up or promotion. We'll say promotion. Let promotion be equal to, and I'm going to say document dot get element by ID, and just pass in the special promotion ID. So what we've done is we've created a H4, this person here, this piece of text. We have given it an ID. We've said document.get element by ID, and we've stored it in the promotion variable. So just to make sure that's all working, I'm just going to log out promotion, and promotion should be the H4. And we see it there. Okay, awesome. Now what I want to do is I want to add an event listener to it. So what we can do is we can just say promotion. Remember, promotion is just our H4 element. And what we're going to do is we're just going to say add event listener. I probably should have come up with a better name. Please forgive me. So what do we want to listen out for? We want to listen out for a mouse over. So when the user mouses over the H4, something is going to happen. So then we can do our function. So you can do an arrow function, or you can just use the function keyword parentheses, because it's a function, and then curly braces where we're going to write our code block. So what we want to do, just to make sure it's working, is we'll just say console.log something happens. Okay? So if I now save and refresh, watch what happens when I mouse over flights are on sale. We log something out to the console. Okay, so this is really cool, because imagine you're working for a company, and we all know that if you want to close down a browser window, a lot of the time people go up here. So maybe you have some text or content here, and if you notice the user is going up to leave, you say, hey, where are you going? Do you not want to book a flight? Okay, so what we're going to do now is, instead of logging that out to the console, we're actually going to alert, flights to Athens will say 40% off until midnight. We're trying to create that urgency, so this is what our boss wanted. Essentially, people will buy flights to Athens. So now look what happens, right? I'm hovering, 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 and when I get down to here, we get this alert. Flights to Athens, 40% off until midnight. So guys, that is the mouse over event in JavaScript. So it's really cool. You could even use it to create some sort of pop-up yourself. You could create an element and all that kind of thing. So this tutorial was about the mouse over event listener in JavaScript. Hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I'll see you in the next one. Hi everyone, and welcome back. Okay, in this tutorial we're just going to very quickly review what we learned about the document object model. So this will just be a very quick review lecture. So we learned about this thing called the document object model. It is essentially an API that we can use to manipulate the document object model itself. So what we can do is, for example, we can get certain elements from the DOM. We saw the different selectors we can use. So we saw document.getElementById. We have the query selector. We have the query selector all if you want to get, multiple elements rather than just one. We saw you can get elements by class name. You can also get elements by tags name. I feel that should be get elements by tag name. That might be a typo there. I apologize. But essentially, there are different ways that we can query the DOM. So we can query the DOM and then store something in a variable. And then we can do something with that content. So for example, we can change the text. We can even change the HTML itself if we wanted to. We can change various CSS styles. So for example, you could change the color of text, you could change the font size, the line height, etc. We also saw that we can also manipulate CSS classes using the document object model. You could add a CSS class and provide styling to an element. You can also remove an element CSS class, and you can toggle a styling on and off. We also saw as well that we can listen out for user events. So rather than creating an element and then in our JavaScript file deleting it or changing something about it, like the style or for example the href, some sort of attribute, and that's another thing we can do as well. We saw we can actually can change attributes as well. Attributes. So for example, where is a href pointing to? You could change, for example, the source of an image. So many things you can do. Okay. We also saw that we can listen out for user events. For example, a user click, the user pressing down a key, mouse events, and we saw the very cool add event listener inbuilt method in JavaScript. We can listen out for some sort of event, as I say, a click, a key press, some mouse hover event, and then we can do something, run some code, basically when the user has done something. Do something, yes. Awesome, okay. So that was now the 6th chapter of the course. What we're now going to do in the next chapter is we're going to start making some projects together, actually bringing together everything that we've learned. So now you are hopefully familiar with the different data types, the document object model. So while we've covered a lot of topics, and I'm happy you've learned a lot of the basic syntax around data types, functions, arrays, objects, control flow, and decision making, we now need to start bringing all that together to enhance your learning experience with vanilla JavaScript. So hopefully I'll see you over the next few tutorials where we actually start building some cool stuff together, including a dice roll. So I will see you in the next tutorial. Thank you for your attention.